In case you didn't know, YouTube has a fun rule where they demonetize a video if you swear in the first 30 seconds because advertisers don't like having swears. This article, though, requires a lot of them, and I want to give it the justice it deserves. So first off, apologies to my editor, FaZe, for having to censor this out for the first 30 seconds. You do good work. Second off, we still have at least like 10 seconds, so can you play some hold music? Okay, we should be good. Let's go on a fucking rant about fucking Const versus fucking let. This will be a fun one. Shout out to Jamie Builds for this one. Builds Ghost, legend from the open source JavaScript scene forever. I'm excited to read this for a bit. Let's dive in. I don't want to be the guy to write this post, but I am because Chris told me to. So blame that fucking guy. I'm a victim here. Well, now we're all victims having to read it, but should be a good time. But you're all using Const in JavaScript too much, and it does bug me just ever so little. Oh no, is he going to be like the Ryan Florence let guy? If you guys don't know this, remix docs, does he still do it? Did he stop doing it? Did he stop? Did the team make him stop? I think they did. There isn't a single instance of let on the first loader page for the remix docs. What? Did Ryan Florence get like murdered or something? What happened? I just had to see some of his source because I need to confirm he's not a changed man. What? No. It happened. I really didn't think this would happen, but here we are. Even Ryan Florence is coming around, so that's going to make this more interesting because he was the big let person. For those who don't know, for some reason, Ryan Florence, creator of Remix and React Router, big fan of let and known for hating on Const. Seems like that's changed. Let's see what Jamie has to say, though, because I'm actually really curious. Point 1, Const doesn't do shit, and we all know it. Okay, fair. Okay. In case somebody here doesn't know, Const for a lot of things like an object or an array isn't properly constant. So if I was to just open up my console here, const sum list equals hi. I can't sum list equals another list. That will error, which sure makes sense. But what I can do is sum list dot pop, and now sum list is empty. And I could even sum list dot push something that wasn't the type of the list before. If that was a string list, I push 5 to it. Now some list has values in it that I'm not expecting. This can quickly start a lot of issues. Another common one, let's say const x equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Const reversed equals x dot reverse. Now I have reversed, which is a new list that has these backwards. I could even reverse dot pop, and it will, or reversed dot pop. Typoing. And that will remove the last value, which is 1 in this case, and reversed is 5432. So my old array x should be fine, right? Nope. It actually returned the same reference after reversing it. I hate JavaScript. Anyways, const does not imply any kind of immutability of the value itself. It only implies immutability of the binding. Yeah. I thought the point of JavaScript was that we didn't have to think about memory and pointers. Why do we have memory and pointers? Gabriel in chat just pointed out a really important thing, that they had to create new methods in JavaScript, to sort and to reverse, to avoid it. Because if they change the behavior of the existing ones, a bunch of things break. So to sorted, I don't know if this shipped yet. Oh, it's available? If I go back here, x.to reversed. That works now. If I go back up enough, rebind this as y. Const rv equals y dot to reversed. Now RV is the new list and Y is the old list. Look at that. It's how it always should have worked. Thank you, JavaScript, for getting your shit together. Anyways, it still doesn't solve the problem here that we're effectively making pointers in a world with no memory bindings. Const is, Point 2, the linters can't save you now. Let's also eliminate the idea that we could somehow statically enforce that const values are immutable with a linter. Like, sure, you could for this simple case. Const foo's props true, foo prop false, lint error. Cool. But then, side effects exist and shit will hurt you. This is a great point. If you make a function that mutates something and you pass it this object, linters aren't going to help you. Theoretically, you could make a really strict type system around your JavaScript that requires you pass mutable or immutable things to and from functions, but no one's figured that one out yet. There's stuff like immer that helps. Immer was created by the guy who made MobX, if you're not familiar. The goal was to do proper immutability, so when you wanted to make a change, you actually have to make a new thing, and it strictly enforces that with a bunch of chaotic hacks. But there are ways to brute force immutability, and they're really cool, but they're just one piece of the puzzle, and they're posted on this bright green blog that is impossible to read. The contrast is just not good enough. So maybe another time. Anyways, and here, no lint error because he called this, pass that there, you get it. And yeah, type systems like Flow and hi, have you tried TypeScript? You really should try TypeScript. I want TypeScript, and I get it. I'm actually curious what he linked this to. It theoretically, TypeScript could do something like this, but they actually don't. Yeah. And then point 3. No, it's not useful for compilers. Also fair. You might be thinking, oh, but it can still be used to optimize code or whatever. You'd be right in thinking that compiler optimizations would make it interesting enough to use, but you'd be wrong in thinking that const is at all useful to optimizing compilers. It's already really, really easy to identify a binding and figure out if it's never reassigned. All of the relevant optimizations are already possible without const ever being a thing. Also, V8 and friends have been doing these optimizations without const for a really long time. Benedict or Franziska or whoever can correct me if I'm wrong, but Babel definitely can already do this shit. This is a shout out to the original Babel creators as well, because they were doing a lot of stuff to turn your modern JavaScript with const, lets, imports, and all the fancy ES6 plus stuff in order to get it working in older JavaScript environments. They know very well the difference between a const and a var and how different environments handle them. Good shout out there. Point 4. So what are we going to do? First off, we don't have to do anything. There is no reason you would ever have to use const. And wherever we are using it, we could just as easily use let, and our code wouldn't be impacted in any way. Honestly, if you just want to stop here and never use const again and never question it further, you would literally save a whole minutes of your life. And you're going to lose those all watching this video, so appreciate that. If you want to lose even more, you can hit that subscribe button below the video, which means you'll get recommended more of these videos. And I think they're pretty good. You seem to think so. If you made it this far, you should consider that. Anyways, but we have const, so why don't we use it for something, right? We could use it to communicate. Sure, I was actually going to make this point earlier, and it's fair. To me, the point of const isn't so much that you're actually defining a thing that cannot be mutated. It's an indication of intent. It's telling the other developers on the project, hey, I don't necessarily want to have this thing be mutated. The point of this isn't to change. In fact, I'd go the opposite way, where since I use let significantly less than const, usually when I use let, the reason for it is to indicate that this does change down the road. It's very rare I use let simply because there isn't much that I mutate in the traditional sense. But if I do need to, that's what I use it for. On this point, before we go further, I'm going to do a stupid thing. I'm going to look at one of my code bases. So what I wanted to do is search const. We'll only include TS and TSX files. We got 1,239 consts. And that's with a space at the end to make sure it's actually tagging const definitions. We have 25 lets. Let that sink in. 1,239 consts. 25 lets. I think this emphasizes my point. It means that when you see let, you treat it differently. The point of const isn't that it indicates something different so much as the point of let is that it indicates something different. It means the value that you've bound right at the start is likely going to change. Someone in chat just said something that might sound stupid, but I actually fully agree with. When I use let, I feel dirty. I'm a big functional programming nerd. I like to make new values and call functions when things change rather than modifying the original value. I love the ideas of immutability. I know that const isn't real immutability, but it encourages us to write in that fashion. And it also means that when we see the word let as a definition for something, that we know it's different and we treat it differently as a result. Funny enough, I've actually had to push back on the team for breaking out functions for things where we didn't need to, and just making it a let made more sense. In fact, I bet I can find one of these here. Here's a good one where we have a content type that we can guess from the file name, but if the file type is a certain type, like a blob or a PDF, then we override the content type. This is so much easier than writing a function that does all of this. There are better examples too, where retry count, that's a great thing to have be just a value that you call and update. There are certain things that let makes more sense for. And another good point someone in chat just made, let always makes them double take. Yes, it should, because you should treat it differently. When a value is going to be reassigned, you now know as the code reviewer or the person updating that code that there was intent for this thing to change. It means you treat this thing differently from all of the other things here, which you should, because the intent of the thing is different. Also, all these other values like offset and end, these can't be reassigned because these values are numbers. So a lot of those issues with const don't exist here, but let describes intent. And I think that's my immediate point of disagreement with this article, assuming that their push is to go towards using let more. I think let is the part that communicates unique meaning, not const. So point 5, what we've chosen to communicate is annoying as fuck. Am I about to get dunked on for not pre-reading? Let's see. So lots of people, okay, maybe not you, you special little shit. Oh, Jamie thinks I'm special. So lots of people are doing this thing where they change every let variable, which is never reassigned to const. No, I'm starting with const and I change it to let when it is being reassigned. I think you're backwards here, Jamie, but I'll hear you out. Let answer equals 42. Never change the answer. Just keep doing other stuff with the value. Cool. A reviewer might see this code and say that let should be a const, so the reader knows at the declaration of answer that it never changes. And I agree, if it does change, it can be a little misleading there. And many of them will include linter tools for enforcing that rule in every variable declaration, even sometimes applying the fix automatically. I have that. So it's let right now, and when I save, it gets switched back to const. So yeah, I have a linter that fixes this, it auto-completes, you get the idea. That's better. But is it better? Did you really mean to communicate that we should never change the answer, or do we just happen to never change it? What if we came along later and decided that we were okay with changing the answer, but now it's a const, and we really aren't sure if we're going to break someone's expectation for answer if we do change it? Is again the point where I disagree. I really think it's the opposite, where if the reference to a thing is going to change, like in line, we should change it. I actually like the example that Jamie put here, because you can't change the answer here, because answer is a number. There's nothing you can do to this to change it. This is actually constant. If this was an object, it'd be a little different. I totally understand that. Run watch index.ts. Cool. And now this will run whenever I save things. So const example equals, we'll do 45. Cool. Function math a number a equals, cool. Let's try this. Console.log example. Console.log math example, console.log example once more to see if it mutated or not. And this is just the first example of const actually working, because here we said const example is 45. We pass this example value through to the math function, and it didn't change. And if I change this to let, yep, also doesn't change. Because again, when you're passing a bare value like this, it is effectively always constant, which is why const versus let here actually isn't something you should think about. And you should always use const when doing this here. If it's not reassigned within this context, then the value is what's being passed, not the binding. If I change this slightly though, const example is number 45 to 42 instead, I guess, that. And now a is actually an object that takes in number. And we'll reassign this to a num equals a dot num plus 1. And here we'll see num 42, 43, 43. So I'll say before, during, and after to make it a little clearer. Before num 42, during num 43, after num 43. And again, if I change that from const to let, it's going to do the same thing. But if this was just a number value, const and let doesn't change anything. This is why it's admittedly confusing, because values are passed by value, objects are passed by reference in JavaScript. According to Gabriel in chat, you can actually change the proto values of a const and it will affect all the values with the same type. Kind of hilarious. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff. If I think that's bad, look at Python. I don't. God. Const y equals 0, const x equals 1. I'm just going to yoink this. Okay, that's pretty funny. That you can rebind, because numbers are technically objects in JavaScript, you can reassign the proto to exponential, so like the functions on a number. So if you had like toString, for example, I make it a little easier to understand. 0, 1.toString, you get 0 and 1, but when you override it, I could even do sup nerds, please subscribe. Then the toString on these numbers gets reassigned. And that's for the number primitive for the whole JavaScript runtime too, which is even funnier because we only reassign this on Y. So only Y's theoretically should have changed. But since the number type is global, we have now broken number for every new number. So if I was to do const z equals 15, console.log z.toString, this language is insane. This language is actually insane. You get the point. If anybody has actually had a reason to use this, I am petrified. Please don't do that. Anyways, you get the point. The issue I have with this is that number values being a value will always be passed by reference. The point I'm trying to make here is that a number value like this will always be passed by value, not by reference. And that's why I do think const here makes sense, because unless you're doing some crazy cursed shit like overriding toString, this isn't going to be a problem. But objects are their own crazy world, where here, if I update the number value on this object and then I return it, this gets modified. So yeah, I understand the frustration here. That said, there is an intent when I use these words. And I agree that intent doesn't always mean a lot in JavaScript because these things are immutable. But when I put let here, what I'm expecting is that later down here, I'm going to significantly change this. So when I see let here, I'm kind of expecting like if example.num is less than or equal to 80, then we do something. Or like I change example to be nan. This type of thing I would expect. Or even if this is like num42 status, okay. Since this is TypeScript, I'd put a better type definition here, but the use of let here indicates to me as the developer that within this scope, I might be making meaningful changes here. And I think that does have meaning. It has meaning to people who primarily write JavaScript and are deep in the weeds for these things. And it's meaning that's rare enough that, as I showed here, I have 25 instances of it in this gigantic code base. I should quickly see how big this code base actually is. Yeah. So out of 17,000 lines of TypeScript, we have 25 lets. That is 0.15% of our lines of code are a let. That's tiny, tiny, tiny. It's just, again, it indicates a specific thing for us, which in this case is that we're going to change this within this scope. But yes, I agree, consts aren't really constant. And I guess that's going to be a lot of the frustration here. Funny enough, in other languages like Swift, let is actually the equivalent of const, where let is a constant and then var is a variable. We haven't even talked about var yet. Let's keep going. This is going to take forever otherwise. There's a lot of bindings that we happen to never change that would be totally fine if they did change. In fact, that's probably true for most bindings. It's not something your code will generally care about. There are exceptions here, obviously. I'll give the big one that I had before. Let's say I have a list component, function list, and it takes in props, which has a list that is a number array. And this returns div props.list.map value div value. Should I put a key here? Yeah, I'm lazy though. And now we can render our list. This list takes in 1, 2, 3. Cool. You understand how this works. Let's say we want to reverse list though. I'll do reverse list. The obvious thing to do here is reverse.map. Now let's render both. So I'll do div normal list, copy paste this, reverse list. I have to change the component to be reverse list. We have our list component. Y'all understand that. I just made a new reversed list component where the only difference is props.list has this reverse call. I will say React handles this in strict mode by default now, which is really nice. But we're turning that off for the sake of this demo because I've actually had this problem before strict mode included it. So we have a reverse list. It reverses the list. But as you might be guessing from the earlier issue, this is not as simple and clean as it seems. We have here, we're passing this list, but we're actually duplicating the data. If I was to const list equals, and then we pass this instead, seems fine at first. Ready? Putting normal list below. Now normal list is rendering backwards because list gets reversed by this component. The act of passing the list to the reversed list component causes it to reverse, and it reverses on render, which means you have a really funny additional side effect where if I was to const toggle set toggle equals use state, and I add a button on the bottom here, we're not even going to do anything with this. We're just going to toggle this state, which we're not even using. So I have this high button, and every time I click it, it reverses the sorting of the list. Where in here am I reversing the sort of the list? The reason this is a problem is because the props.list value being passed is being reversed itself with this .reverse call. So every time this component re-renders, this list and wherever it came from gets flipped back and forth. This is the same case for sort. So if I did a sort here, that sort would rerun on every single click of the button and affect other components. So I just moved this toggle from the list component to be outside of the lists. It seems like nothing's happening. I mean, I guess technically nothing's happening because the list isn't re-rendering, but if we were to pass toggle to reverse list, then it's not being used for anything. So still not triggering the re-render. Is React smart enough to not do that? Interesting. I actually thought that would cause a re-render. The more you know. But what I can do is top level re-render. and move this back here for reverse. Actually, don't know if this will work or not. This is a curiosity thing. That's funny. When I cause a re-render at the top level, it resets the state because it redefines list. If I was to move this, actually, now I understand the problem. If I move this out here, yeah, God, you're hopefully, as you watch this, you're seeing just how cursed these behaviors get, where I have this button on the outside, I have this list defined externally. And now whenever I do this, it re-renders the components that are children. And since the list is the same, yeah, definitely not showing this because of past trauma where certain conditions caused a sorted list in a certain dashboard I built to flip. If you happen to not know what the solution here is, there's a few. This is the quick one. Problem gone because we made a new list here. The new solution that I really like is to reversed, which might not be in all browsers yet, because that's why we're getting the error here, because it doesn't know that this is a valid type, but it works and does the right thing. So you have options now, but know that this is a problem, because if you don't know this is a problem and you're passing an array to a component that happens to do something stupid like reversing it, that can suck. That can really suck. So yeah, I sympathize. Back to the article. So what should we actually use const for? I think we'll see what he has to say. It's probably still a good idea to communicate that you really don't intend for something to be changed. But in order to communicate that, we need to only use it when appropriate. For example, const, I actually give a shit if this changes equals 42. Yeah, there's a lot of all caps constants that we use in all of our code bases where the thing doesn't change. Things like an environment variable or a constant value that you want to use for things or a string that you've had translated that you want to apply into your markup, stuff like that. There's a lot of cases where you wouldn't want a thing to change explicitly. And I honestly wish there was something better to indicate that, because this is what I do. I do all caps with underscore so it looks different and behaves in our heads differently. But it'd be nice if there was a proper, like, this is a constant thing that never changes type binding in JavaScript, because there isn't. If you want some good rules to follow, here's my best attempt. Only use const at the top level scope. Interesting. Const here equals is okay. Function nested. Const not here equals never seen a reason to. Let's see. I'm pretty sure I've never seen a binding created in a function that will actually be upset if it changes. I never use const inside nested scopes, and I don't intend to. Why? Because my mom raised me right. See my usage of semicolons. That's why. Interesting. I'm also pro semicolon. I've considered doing a month off of semicolons to see how I feel, but I'm a semicolon guy for sure. Wow, I think I disagree with both of these. When I use let, it's more often at the top level scope. What? I use let at top level all the time. That's what I use it for. It's like configuring things. Let's hear it. On the other hand, if you need to use let at the top level, it's a sign you have some sort of global singleton state, which could cause you problems. Yeah, fair. Usually when I'm doing this, it's in like quick side projects or demos or like hackathon challenges, like, Advent of Code, which I absolutely love doing. For those types of things, let at the top level makes a ton of sense. But here, that's fair. This is fragile. To test, interesting. And that's basically it. I thought this was going to go further. And for the love of all that is not shit, please don't try enforcing this with a linter. Let people communicate what they want to communicate. Y'all drive me crazy with that shit. Get the fuck out of my house. Good ending. Overall, good article. Presents some arguments that I can hear and see. I really just don't agree with this section here about where to and not to use these. And I think he is kind of missing the point, where I could write an alternative angle of this where instead of const doesn't do shit, it would be let communicate something. My difference here really just comes down to that. It's not that const means something. It's that let means something. And when you're using let, it should be with some type of intent and it should communicate something to your team. So yeah, I guess that's my take on this. This is a fun read. Once again, huge shout out to Jamie for this article. I genuinely really enjoyed it. Until next time, peace nerds.